Ethan had always been a man of carefully constructed borders. Our life together was a testament to his love for compartments. There was home life, a placid lake of domestic comfort, where he was my attentive, if somewhat placid, husband. Then there was work life, a vast, murky ocean I was not invited to sail. His job as a freelance logistics and acquisitions consultant for high-end international clients was, by his own admission, complex and confidential. It involved erratic travel, long hours, and a level of operational security that seemed more suited to a spy than a shipping expert. A journalist who specialized in long-form human interest pieces, had once found his secrecy intriguing, a romantic remnant of a bygone era of mysterious men. After 7 years of marriage, however, the intrigue had curdled into a low-grade, persistent hum of unease. There were rules, unspoken but rigid. No tagging him in photos on social media. No surprise visits to his small leased office downtown. All major financial matters were to be handled by him through a labyrinth of separate accounts he claimed were necessary for liability and tax purposes. "It's just cleaner this way, Maya," he'd say, his voice calm and reasonable, making me feel foolish for even questioning it. "You focus on your beautiful words. Let me worry about the ugly numbers." His most sacred border was the one around his work phone. It was a sleek, featureless black slab, completely separate from the personal phone he left lying around the house. That work phone was an extension of his body. It lived in his breast pocket, went with him to the bathroom, and lay face down on the nightstand while he slept, a silent black monolith guarding its secrets. Once, I had picked it up by mistake, thinking it was mine. The physical recoil from him was so sharp, so instinctual, it was as if I'd touched a hot stove. "Sorry," he'd said, his heart rate visibly slowing down. "Work habit. Sensitive client data." I had explained away these oddities for years, weaving them into the narrative of a loving, protective husband whose peculiar job demanded a peculiar lifestyle. My friends thought he was a catch-stable, handsome, and utterly devoted to me in his quiet way. But a good journalist knows that the most interesting stories are found in the margins, in the inconsistencies that other people overlook. And the margins of my marriage were beginning to feel unnervingly wide. The thread that would unravel everything began, as so many stories do, with a search for something else entirely. I was working on a piece about the Herculean struggles of families seeking rare medical treatments for their children. It was a deep dive into a world of crushing debt, experimental trials, and the fierce, defiant hope of parents willing to move heaven and earth. My days were spent on obscure medical forums, parent support groups, and crowdfunding websites, sifting through hundreds of posts. Looking for the perfect subjects to anchor my story. It was late on a Tuesday night. Ethan was supposedly in Houston for a 3-day logistics conference. I was bleary-eyed, scrolling through a fundraising site, my screen a mosaic of smiling, sick children and desperate pleas from their parents. I clicked on a campaign titled "Help Theo Fight." The post was written by a woman named Kate Brenner from Portland, Oregon. She wrote with heartbreaking eloquence about her 6-year-old son's battle with a rare neurological disorder. The family was trying to raise funds to participate in a clinical trial in Switzerland. To boost the campaign's credibility. She had pinned a recent family photo to the top of the page. It was a beautiful shot, taken in a field of autumn leaves. A smiling woman with kind eyes and a cascade of blonde hair had her arms around 2 children. A girl of about 10 and the younger boy, Theo, standing beside them, his hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder, was a man with a proud, happy grin. My breath caught in my chest. The world tilted, the text on my screen blurring into meaningless squiggles. It wasn't just a man who looked like my husband. It was my husband. He looked different, yet fundamentally the same. The glasses were a pair of trendy, thick-rimmed, frames, not the subtle wire ones he wore with me. His hair was shorter, styled with a bit more product. He was wearing a casual flannel shirt, a garment I had never seen him in. Ethan's wardrobe was a uniform of crisp neutral-toned button-downs, but the eyes behind the glasses were his. The shape of his smile, the slight dimple in his left cheek, they were the geography of the face I woke up to every morning. It was Ethan, my Ethan, standing in a field in Oregon, wrapped in the embrace of a completely different life. I felt a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. I clicked through Kate Brenner's public profile linked to the campaign. It was a curated window into a life I never knew existed. Photos of birthday parties, school plays, family vacations to the Oregon coast. There he was, over and over again, playing the role of a doting father and husband. In one photo, he and Kate were clinking champagne glasses, the caption reading, "Happy 12th anniversary to the love of my life. So grateful for every moment with this man." 12 years. I did the math, my fingers numb and clumsy on my keyboard. 12 years ago, I was just finishing journalism school. I hadn't even met Ethan yet. He had married this woman 5 years before he married me. My 7-year marriage, my entire adult life as I knew it, was a lie. He wasn't just having an affair. He had a pre-existing, fully formed family. I wasn't his wife. I was his affair. I was the second life. The journalist in me took over, a cold, clinical override of the screaming, shattered wife. I moved with the chilling sense of purpose. For the next 48 hours, I slept in 2-hour increments, fueling myself with coffee. And a cold, hard rage. I plunged into public records databases, social media back channels, and paid search services, the digital tools of my trade. I found their marriage license filed in Multnomah County, Oregon. I found the property records for their 4-bedroom house. I found Kate's professional website. She was a landscape architect. I found birth announcements for their 2 children, Lily and Theo. I cross-referenced everything. It was all real. Rock solid dot when Ethan came home from his Houston trip. I was a different person. The woman who had waved him off at the airport was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell of a person. Who knew the devastating truth? He walked in, dropped his bags, and smiled his easy, familiar smile. "Hey, you," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I turned my head slightly, and his lips met my cheek. I didn't flinch, but he must have sensed a change in the atmosphere. "Everything. Okay, you seem tense." "Just a tough deadline," I lied, my voice sounding foreign in my own ears. That night, as he slept beside me, I stared at his peaceful face, the face of a stranger. Who was this man? How could a person build such an elaborate, airtight second existence? The sheer logistics of it were staggering. The level of sociopathy required was beyond my comprehension. I felt a terrifying new question begin to form in my mind. If he was capable of a deception this monumental, what else was he capable of? The discovery of his second family was the door. I now knew I had to walk through it and see how deep the rabbit hole went. My initial shock gave way to a pragmatic, urgent need to protect myself. This man had woven a web around 2 families. And I had a sickening feeling that simple infidelity was only the first layer. The secrecy, the burner phone, the convoluted finances, it felt bigger, darker than a mere double life. My investigation turned from his personal life to our shared. One, specifically the parts he had so carefully ring-fenced. The finances. He had always been adamant about keeping them separate. I had my accounts, he had his, and we had one joint account for household bills, into which he deposited a set amount each month. I started there. I logged into the joint account and began tracing the source of his deposits. They came from a holding company I'd never heard of, Orion Freight Logistics, LLC. A quick search showed that the LLC was registered in Delaware, a notorious haven for shell corporations. There was no website, no public presence, just a registered agent's address. It was a dead end, designed to be one. But where there was one shell company, there were likely others. I knew I needed more than I could find in our apartment. I needed to get into his office. The opportunity came a week later. He announced a last-minute 2-day trip to Chicago. The morning he left, my heart was a trip hammer in my chest. I waited a full hour after he drove away, my mind playing out 1,000 disastrous scenarios. Then I took the spare key to his office from the key hook, a key he probably forgot he'd even given me years ago, and drove downtown. His office was in a sterile, anonymous building filled with accountants, lawyers, and small, inscrutable consulting firms. It was a single room, sparsely furnished with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a large framed map of global shipping routes on the wall. It was the perfect picture of boring legitimacy. I went straight for the filing cabinet. The top 2 drawers were unlocked, filled with mundane paperwork, invoices for office supplies, lease agreements, tax forms for Orion Freight Logistics. It was the bottom drawer that was locked. My hands were sweating. I looked around the office, my reporter's eyes scanning for anything out of place. On his bookshelf, amidst a dry collection of books on maritime law and supply chain management, was a small, decorative silver box, the kind used to hold business cards. On a hunch, I opened it. Tucked beneath a stack of his legitimate business cards was a tiny key. It fit the lock on the filing cabinet. The contents of that drawer blew the world of his first betrayal apart and exposed something far more terrifying. There were no files. Instead, there were 5 pristine, hardbound European passports, each with his photograph but bearing different names: Liam O'Connell, Lars Jorgensen, Matteo Rossi. All of them looked official, the holograms glittering under the fluorescent office lights. Beneath the passports were thick wads of cash, crisp bills in euros, Swiss francs, and British pounds, bound by simple rubber bands. And at the very bottom of the drawer was a collection of thin, black leather-bound ledgers. I opened the first one. It wasn't written in prose. It was columns of numbers, letters, and codes. A typical entry read MA2781VVG04 GENAPR18 ACQ 1.2 DISP 3.5. It meant nothing to me. But it felt dangerous. This wasn't the behavior of a man hiding a second family. This was the work of a man hiding a criminal enterprise. The 2 lives weren't just wife in Portland and wife in New York. It was something else entirely. His entire identity, the boring logistics consultant, was a lie. I took photos of everything with my phone, every page of every ledger, every passport, the stacks of cash. I put everything back exactly as I had found it, locked the drawer, returned the key to the silver box, and left, my mind reeling. I knew I was completely out of my depth. This was no longer a story of marital infidelity. This was organized crime. I needed an expert, someone who could read the language of this dark world. And I knew exactly who to call. 3 years ago, I had written an award-winning feature on the shadowy world of art crime. My central source for the piece had been a man named David Chen, a brilliant but irascible retired detective from Interpol's art crime unit. He was living a quiet life in upstate New York, and it had taken all my journalistic charm to get him to talk to me. We had developed a grudging respect for one another. I trusted him. I called him that afternoon, my voice shaking. "David, it's Maya Bishop. I need your help. It's off the record. It's personal." I drove up to see him the next day. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by books on art history and criminology, I laid out my story. I started with the other family, the betrayal that had been the catalyst. Then I showed him the photos from the locked drawer. He put on a pair of reading glasses and leaned over my phone, studying the pictures of the ledgers. He was silent for a long time, swiping from one page to the next. The air in the room was thick with tension. "Well," he finally said, taking off his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. "Your husband isn't a logistics consultant. What is he?" I whispered. "He's a ghost," Chen said, his voice grim. "A high-level trafficker. Based on these codes, my guess is stolen art, antiquities, maybe some high-end forgeries." "2781, he said, pointing to the entry I had noted. "That's the catalog number for a Matisse that was stolen from a private collection in Stockholm in 2018. VVG04 is likely a Van Gogh forgery, fourth in a series. GENAPR18 is the location and date of the transaction. Geneva, April 2018. ACQ is his acquisition price, probably 1.2 million. DSP is his dispersal price, 3.5 million. This isn't just a criminal, Maya. This is a very sophisticated, very successful one." The room felt like it was closing in on me. Art theft, forgery, a ghost. It was like something out of a movie, not my quiet life in a Brooklyn brownstone. "The two families," I said, the realization dawning on me. "It's part of his cover. The perfect camouflage. Who would suspect a devoted father of two in Portland, or a stable, boring husband in New York?" "Exactly," Chen said. "He's not living a double life." A double life. He's living two covers for his real life. And Maya, he leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. "These are not people you want to mess with. They don't just break hearts, they break bodies. You are in a tremendous amount of danger." The fear was cold and sharp, a shard of ice in my gut. This man I had married wasn't just a cheat and a liar. He was a predator, and his entire life, including me, was part of his disguise. He had two separate lives, and I had just uncovered both. The question now was what I was going to do about it, and how I was going to survive it. My first instinct was to run, disappear, change my name, and move to a city where no one knew me. But two things stopped me. The first was the cold, hard knot of rage in my stomach. He had stolen 7 years of my life, built on a foundation of lies that was more rotten than I could ever have imagined. I couldn't just let him get away with it. The second, more pressing thought was of Kate and her children. They were part of his cover story, props in his elaborate stage play. They had no idea that the man they loved, the father of their children, was a dangerous international criminal. He wasn't just betraying them, he was endangering them. His enemies were their enemies, and they didn't even know it. I had to tell her Dot it was the most difficult decision of my life. I was about to detonate a bomb in the heart of a stranger's family, a woman who was, by all rights, my rival. But she was also his victim, just like me. We were on opposite sides of his first lie, but we were on the same side of his second dot with David Chun's help. I planned my approach. I couldn't just call her. I had to do it in person. I booked a flight to Portland, telling my editor I was pursuing a lead for my medical story. My cover story was that I was a journalist who had uncovered some disturbing information about her husband while working on a financial crimes piece and felt a moral obligation to inform her. It was close enough to the truth. I met her at a quiet coffee shop in a leafy Portland suburb. When she walked in, my heart seized. She was lovely, with a warm, open face and laugh lines around her eyes. She looked like a good person, a good mother. She smiled at me, a friendly, questioning smile, and my stomach churned with guilt. "Kate?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, you're Maya?" We sat at a small table in the corner. For a moment, I couldn't speak. How do you begin a conversation that will destroy someone's world? I started with the gentler of the two bombs. I'm a journalist from New York, I began, my hands shaking so hard I had to clasp them in my lap. I've been working on a long-term investigation. I'm afraid your husband's name came up. His name is Ethan Brenner, correct? Yes, she said, her smile tightening slightly. Is there a problem? I took a deep breath and slid a manila envelope across the table. I think you should look at this. Inside was a single document, my marriage license. To Ethan Bishop, dated 5 years after hers. She stared at it, her brow furrowed in confusion. I don't understand. Who is Ethan Bishop? It's your husband's other name, I said softly. The name he uses in New York, with me. I'm his other wife. The color drained from her face. She looked from the paper to my face, her mind clearly struggling to process the impossible information. Disbelief, confusion, and then a flicker of pure, unadulterated anger. That's not possible. You're lying. This is some kind of sick joke. I wish it were, I said. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of me and Ethan at our wedding, then another of us in the apartment in Brooklyn. I didn't need to show her more. She could see the truth in my eyes. She saw a woman as shattered as she was. She was silent for a full 5 minutes, her world crumbling around her. Tears welled in her eyes, and she choked back a sob. 12 years, she whispered, my children. Then came the second bomb. The harder one. Kate, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I'm afraid it's worse than that. His infidelity is the least of it. What I need to tell you next is going to be even harder to hear. But you and your children are in danger. I spent the next hour laying out the rest of it. The shell companies, the fake passports, the ledgers, the stolen art. I told her what David Chun had told me. That her husband, our husband, was a high-level criminal in a dangerous international ring. To her incredible credit, she didn't break down. The grief on her face was quickly replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. The mother bear emerged. The safety of her children was paramount, and she understood immediately that Ethan's criminal life put them directly in the line of fire. We were no longer two wives fighting over a man. We were two mothers, two women, allied against a common threat. Our shared betrayal forged an immediate, powerful, and deeply strange bond. We spent the rest of the afternoon in that coffee shop, piecing together his lies, our timelines, our shared reality. We compared notes. His frequent business trips to Asia were often his trips to see me in New York. His consulting trips on the East Coast were his trips back to her in Portland. His life was a dizzying, complex itinerary of deception. We left that coffee shop with a plan. We weren't going to run. We weren't going to hide. We were going to burn his world to the ground. With David Chen as our quiet, off-the-books handler. We began to orchestrate Ethan's downfall. We couldn't go to the local police. The risk of leaks or worse, corrupt officials in the pocket of Ethan's organization was too high. The tip had to go to the highest, most insulated level, Interpol. And it had to be completely anonymous, untraceable back to us. The ledgers I had photographed were our primary weapon. Kate, in a move of breathtaking bravery, managed to secure even more. On a day Ethan was away, she went into his home office, a place she rarely entered, and found a hidden compartment. In his desk containing a hard drive. It was a complete backup of his entire criminal enterprise, contacts, transaction histories, bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, photos of stolen masterpieces. It was the Rosetta Stone of his secret life. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Ethan told me he was going on his most important trip of the year. A week in Geneva. He claimed it was to finalize a deal for his logistics company. We knew it was for a major exchange of stolen art. Chen confirmed it through his back channels. This was our moment. The plan was precise. We compiled the most damning evidence from the hard drive into a single encrypted file. Chun drafted an anonymous email, routing it through a series of protected servers across 3 continents. The email, sent to a specific trusted contact of his inside Interpol's headquarters in Lyon, contained the location of the exchange in Geneva, the names on Ethan's fake passports, and the key to decrypting the file, which would give them his entire organization on a silver platter the night the email was sent. Kate and I were on a video call, 2 faces lit by the glow of our screens, thousands of miles apart, but united in our terror and resolve. We had just lit a fuse that would either save us or get us killed. The day of the exchange was the longest of my life. I stayed in my apartment, jumping at every sound. Kate kept her children home from school, telling them it was a special movie day. We waited. For hours, there was nothing. Just the deafening silence of our shared anxiety. Then, in the late afternoon, the news broke. It started as a small alert from a European news agency. Major art theft ring busted in Geneva. My heart stopped. I clicked the link. The story was sparse on details, but it confirmed a series of coordinated raids, multiple arrests, and the recovery of several priceless masterpieces. An hour later, the bigger news outlets picked it up, and there it was. On the screen of my laptop, I saw a photo of several men in handcuffs being led out of a luxury hotel by Swiss police. And in the center of the frame, his face pale with shock and disbelief, was Ethan, my husband, her husband. Exposed to the world for what he truly was, I took a screenshot and sent it to Kate without a word. Her reply came back a minute later. "It's over." Tears streamed down my face. Tears of relief, of grief, of a strange, hollow victory. We had done it. We had uncovered both his lives, and we had destroyed them. The aftermath was a legal and emotional maelstrom. Interpol and the FBI descended, and we, through lawyers, provided them with the rest of the evidence, positioning ourselves as unknowing, victimized spouses. It was a story that was, for the most part, true. We were victims. We just weren't hopeless. Ones. Kate and I spoke every day, navigating the labyrinth of investigators, lawyers, and asset seizures. Our brownstone in Brooklyn, the house in Portland, both were purchased with the proceeds of crime and were seized. We both lost our homes. We both had to start over from nothing. But we had each other. We were the only 2 people on Earth who understood the precise, bizarre contours of our shared trauma. We were members of a club of 2, forged in the fires of an unbelievable betrayal. A year later, I published my story. Not my personal story that was buried, a source I would never name. It was a sprawling, deeply researched expose on the mechanics of the modern art crime world. It won a Polk Award, the highest honor of my career. I had turned the wreckage of my life into the foundation of my greatest professional achievement. I saw Kate one last time, 6 months after the story was published. I flew to Portland and we met in the same coffee shop. She had moved into a smaller rental, was rebuilding her landscape architecture business, and her children were resilient, adapting. They were safe. Ethan was serving a 25-year sentence in a Swiss prison. "We did it," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "Yes, we did," I replied. We weren't friends, not in the traditional sense. Our bond was too strange, too rooted in pain. But we were allies, we were survivors. We looked at each other, and in her eyes, I saw my own strength reflected back at me. As I flew home to New York, back to the new life I was building for myself, I realized the profound irony of it all. I had set out to uncover his double life, thinking I would find a simple, sordid affair. Instead, I found a criminal mastermind and a secret family. But in the process of uncovering his 2 false lives, I was forced to discover a true one. My own. A life where I was not a victim, not a prop, not a wife. A life where I was strong, resilient, and finally, the sole author of my own story.